All right, now I could not complete this Photoshop course without including a video on Vanishing Point. It's one of the coolest additions that Adobe has made to Photoshop, and it came out in Photoshop CS2. So if you have Photoshop CS2 or Photoshop CS3, you will find Vanishing Point underneath the filter menu right here. Now Vanishing Point, what it is it allows us to preserve correct perspective and edits of images. Images that contain perspective planes, such as buildings or rectangular objects. And so to explain how Vanishing Point works, it's a lot easier if I show you instead of just explaining it to you. So let's go ahead and I'll do just a really quick basic example here so you can really understand on what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and move this image out of the way. And what you'll want to do is load up the project image, which is inside the project files folder, and you'll find it right here. It's a stock image of an alleyway here, and I'll go ahead and open this up. All right, so let me go ahead and just give you a basic example on how Vanishing Point works. I've loaded up this image that we're going to be using for our project. I'll come up here to Filter and go into Vanishing Point. Now remember, Vanishing Point allows us to patch and edit images going along a perspective plane. So we must tell Vanishing Point where that perspective plane is. And to do that, over here on the toolbar, which should be already selected, is the Create Plane tool. And what we're going to do is create this perspective grid right on this side of the building here. You don't have to be too perfect at first. I'm just doing this really sloppy right here so I can just zoom out. But what we're going to want to do is look at the building here really closely and set this grid to the same perspective as the building. A really easy way to do this, if you look on the building, you can see the very tops of the windows. Well, what I can do is make sure that this grid here is writing and going along in the same angle as the tops of those windows. Just like bringing this all the way down to the very bottom or writing along the edge of the sidewalk here. It's the same thing. You'll want to do the same for the top, the bottom, and also the sides. So you can see if I zoom in down here, and I'll select the Edit Plane tool, I'll adjust this grid here. So this side of the grid here, down on the end, is going in the same direction as the wall here. This is almost like a little bit crooked photo. It's almost at an angle, but I'll just ride this right along the wall the best I can. Almost look at this gutter, or this looks like a pipe coming out of the ground here. I can keep an eye on that and really match this up just to that pipe there. And that will help me in determining the right angle, and I can hold down the space bar on the keyboard and navigate around. Now you can see it's just a little bit off, so what I'll need to do is adjust the top right or the top left of the grid here. So I'll need to zoom out of the image, and I'll just come through here and readjust this. And now I will go ahead and adjust this side of the grid. And I'll use the window here just so I make sure it's going directly up and down right along the same plane. Look at that. Okay, so we've told Vanishing Point where the perspective plane is on this image, because Vanishing Point can't see the photo. So you have to really tell Vanishing Point where it is. But now that we have this, we can do a whole bunch of things inside this grid area. I'm going to select the Marquee tool. Let me go ahead and just give you a really basic example on how Vanishing Point works. What I'm going to do is draw a selection around this window here, and we're going to copy this window and place another window right next to it. I'm going to go ahead up here and just draw a selection around it like this, and as soon as I have a selection around it, what I'll do is hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and I'll see those little two arrows, and that means that I'm just about ready to duplicate what's inside this selection here. But I can also hold down the Shift key which will allow it to snap to the perspective grid. So I'll hold down Shift, and then I'll click, and I will make a copy. I'm actually dragging out a copy of that window. But if you look closely, the window is resizing itself based on where that perspective plane is. You see that? So I can just go ahead and make a copy and position that right next to it. Click outside of the selection, and you would have never guessed I made another window there. It's just there. So that's the cool thing about Vanishing Point. Now, there's a lot of other tools that are in Vanishing Point, and I'm going to show you how all these work during this tutorial. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, here we are back in Photoshop. And again, if you want to follow along, you can go into the Vanishing Point folder, which is inside the Project Files folder, and you can use that image and follow along right with me. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to remove this bicycle from this image, and we're going to do it in Vanishing Point. We're going to completely make it disappear, just like that. And we're going to do this only using Vanishing Point. It's just to show you how powerful it is. So what I'm going to do is move this image out of the way, and we're going to start off with our original image right here. All right, here's a little tip. Before you go into Vanishing Point, always make a new layer, because that way when you're through with Vanishing Point, all the edits and patches that you do will be on their own separate layers, so you can just remove them or edit them later, and you can always keep your original image. So what I'm going to do is come over here to the Layers palette, make a new layer, and then come right up here to Filter, and down here to Vanishing Point. All right, here we are, and I'll go ahead and zoom into this image here, and we're going to create our perspective plane on this sidewalk, because we're going to start off by erasing the wheels here of the bike, and then we'll work up and start removing the rest of the bike from there. But I'm going to come over here, and I'll zoom in a little bit closer so you can see this. I'll hold down the space bar to get the hand tool here. And I'm going to start really small here when I create this grid. I always like to do that because I like to use areas on the photo to tell me the best perspective in the photo, or to figure out where the best perspective in the photo is. And I'll do something about like this. I'm going to use these tiles on this sidewalk to help me determine that plane there. Look at that. I'll pull this out just a little bit. And to see how this looks, I can just zoom out and we can see how well we've done. Vanishing Point will allow us to stretch this grid all the way down to the bottom, or all the way down to the end of the sidewalk. So yes, we can erase all the bicycles in this entire image. That will probably take a very long time. We're not going to do that on this video, but I'm just going to show you how to remove this one bicycle over here in the front. But what I'm also going to do is zoom out, and we're probably going to want to get all the way in the corner of this image down here, since we do have some shadows from the bicycle. Well, what I'll do then is pull this grid outside of the image. So I'll go ahead and zoom out, and I'll pull this outside. So we have plenty of room to work with, so I can get all the way in the corner of the image. Okay, this is good, and I like it. So what I'll do now is select the marquee tool, because we're going to go ahead and patch up the sidewalk here, or patch over the bike. There we go. You'll be doing a lot of zooming in and out with the Vanishing Point. What I'm going to do is create a selection inside the grid. And I'm going to select an area of the sidewalk here. I'm also going to look out for any ridges or cracks or anything like that. I'm going to pull this selection all the way to the end. I'm going to release the mouse. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, which is the Option key on the Mac. And I'll get those two little arrows there. And then I'll also hold down the Shift key, so that selection will ride right along the edges of the grid. Because if I don't hold down the Shift key, look what will happen. You see how loose it is? It's kind of flimsy. But by holding down Shift, it will attach itself to the edge of the grid. So don't forget that. And I'll just go ahead and drag this out and position it somewhere about like there. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I will move down, and what I can do, I can hold down Alt and Shift once more and drag out another copy. So I don't have to reselect down here or anything like that. I can make another copy. Let's take a quick look here. We can see what's happening. There is some type of, somewhat of a discoloration. As you can see that the color and the shading and the lighting is a little bit different down here. It's a little bit different down here than it is up here. So you can see we want that to match. A way to do that, if you want to keep the original color of the sidewalk, the original lighting and shading of the sidewalk here, what you'll want to do then is when you're making your patches, like we are doing right now, make sure that the heal setting on the options bar is actually turned on. In the heal setting, this sort of works like the healing brush or the healing tool in Photoshop. It's kind of like the same, it behaves the same way. I can show you an example here. I can turn this on, and what I'll do is drag out another copy of these stones on the sidewalk here, and I will position this right about here, and then I'll go back up to the heal option and turn that on, and as soon as I turn that on, watch what will happen to that patch. Boom. You can see it blend in a lot nicer into the original color and shading that was below the patch, or originally there to begin with, okay? So I can go ahead and undo, and then I can hold down Alt and Shift, and I can drag out another patch like this. And then I can push the space bar, but it looks like to me, I'm gonna have to zoom out. There we go, and I will undo to get back my selection, hold down Alt and Shift, and finish this patch. There we go. So you can see we've just about patched up our wheels. They're almost gone. Now that was pretty simple to do. You can see that the blend is very gradual now that we've used the heal setting. But also notice that I'm not all the way over to the edge of the sidewalk. You can see we have a distance here. So that is a little bit of a problem. That's something I can go back and re-click on this perspective plane here, get that back up, and then what I can do is pull that over so it hits the wall there. There we go, just making a little fine adjustment there. And I'm just coming through here now and just patching up some areas. Okay, I'm not going to get too fussy with this stuff right now because I really want to show you the tools in Vanishing Point and how they all work and everything. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and move on to this wall, this side of the building here, and we're going to go ahead and start to remove the rest of this bike here. So let's go over and select the Create Plane tool, and what I'll do is just come down here and start up like this, and I'm going to use the siding on this building almost like a guide for this grid. I'll just stop right there for now and connect this at the very bottom. We can also use the last grid that we created almost like as a guide. And I will click, and there we go. And then I can go ahead and readjust this if I need to. I can pull this up. I'm going to use these windows here to help me determine the side here of the grid, so I can get that going in the right direction. Rest this side of the grid right along that window there. Sometimes when you see the grid, that usually tells you that you're pretty close to getting it right. Usually right when I get it perfect, then the grid shows up. So just almost like a little bit of an indicator just to let you know that you're doing a good job, I guess. So we're going to patch up this bike. We're going to start by creating a selection on this area of the wall, which there's nothing on this area of the wall, so we can use this area to patch the bike. So I can draw a selection like this. I can hold down the Alt key and maybe the Shift key as well. And I'm not sure, yeah, I probably won't need that Shift key because if you look at the bottom, you can see how that's not matching up very closely. Just make sure that that Shift key is off, and then I will move this up just a little bit. Don't worry about the bottom area here too much. We can go back and patch that later. But you can see this is non-destructible. So every time I lay this patch down, well, if I move it again, it's still giving me the original area that I've selected down here. And so you can see right when I move it, we get back the original patch. But as soon as I lay it down, then it starts to heal. It starts to use the shading and the colors and the lighting around the areas to blend it in more. Now this doesn't line up here at the top very well, but I'm just going to pull this down to probably going to match this top up the best I can. And here's a tip, folks. If you come over here to the toolbar, select this tool right here, which is the transform tool. And if you ever have areas, lines or things like that, well, you can use the transform tool to transform this patch that you've created. Watch this. I'll click on the bottom here and I can move this up and meet it right to that groove there in the wall. Look at that. So that's another tip. That's something else you can do. I'm going to select the selection tool and hold down Alt and Shift and drag over another copy and patch this up, just like so. And right now I don't have to worry about being that neat. I'm just going to go ahead and just go a little quickly here. I'll select the transform tool. I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. And if I need to, I can also rotate it. Okay, but I think for this, I'm just going to line these up the best I can and come back later and worry about matching those up later with the stamp tool. But this looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave it for now, and let's go ahead and select the selection tool, and I can click outside of that selection to deselect it so we can see below it here. Okay, now it looks pretty obvious that we patched this up. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to use the stamp tool to correct some of these patches down here. Now the way the stamp tool works is pretty much the same way as the stamp tool has always worked in Photoshop. If you're not familiar with it, it's been around for years, back Photoshop 4.0 or probably before that. The only thing about Vanishing Point using the stamp tool is that the stamp, wherever you sample an area, it'll actually move along the perspective plane and change its size depending on where you are in that grid. So what I'm going to do to explain this, I'm going to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, which is the Option key, and you'll get a little crosshair. See a little crosshair there? So wherever you click with that crosshair is the area that you want to patch with. You see, if we want to patch this gap here that we have, well, I can hold down Alt, click over here on an area that I like, release that, and pull over a stamp of that area, and then I can click and patch that up like that. And I can also move right over and create another patch like this. And I can just keep going until I get all the way across. So that area never leaves my stamp tool until I sample another area. I'm going to hold down Alt, click right here, and I'm just going to move this along here. There we go, something like that. And you can see up here that this is really obvious that we've patched it. So what I can do is hold down Alt, sample an area right next to it. And by the way, we do have diameter settings here. You can actually control the size of the stamp tool, just to let you know. So it's very similar to a brush in Photoshop, where we can also control the hardness. But I think you'll probably mostly use the diameter and the healing option here when you're using the stamp tool. And we have a little area here, and it's things like this, little parts like this are really easy to edit. All we have to do is just paint over them like this, and they go away. But let me show you something else here that I think you're really going to like, and that I was talking about earlier when we have this stamp tool. And since we've created the grid, well, Let me go ahead and just make this a little bit larger here. Let me sample an area like right here. And if you look closely, this sampled area gets larger or smaller depending on where I have it on the perspective grid. You see, moving down this way, it's smaller, but if I move it this way on the grid, it starts to get larger. You see that? And that's the cool thing about Vanishing Point, is that you're always working within this perspective plane. You're not working in a two-dimensional type view. It's always this perspective area. So that's really nice. And so what I'm going to do here is go ahead and finish patching up this wall here. And we have some unwanted grooves in the wall here. So what I'm going to do is just zoom into those and select that stamp tool and probably make that brush just a little bit smaller. I'm going to hold down Alt, click right next to that groove, and paint down over that groove. And I don't want to get too close there to the bottom. I'm just going to, there we go. There, something like that. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And we also have some little specks here that you can tell that we've patched because they're repeating over and over. There's very repetitive areas. Like there's some more right here, but I'm not going to do those right now. I just want you to just get the general idea on how this works. But let's come over here and zoom out because I want to show you something really quick. You see how this wall right here is a little bit brighter than it is over here? Let me go ahead and select the hand tool. This area of the wall is brighter and lighter than this area. Okay? Well, in that case, I will make a selection and I will hold down Alt and Shift, and then I will drag this just to that point, and then I will stop. I don't want to go any further than that, so we can have this lighting here continue all the way down. And you can see really closely there that now that I've done that, this doesn't match very well at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and select the Transform tool and nudge this up a little bit. Look at that. And I can go ahead and do the same for the top here. Let me go ahead and just select that. All right. Let me show you something else that I think you're just going to love, and something that I really love in Vanishing Point, which is something different that you don't see when you're in the normal Photoshop environment there. I'm going to select the Marquee tool, draw another selection over the wall here. I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift and patch up the end of this bike here. But I want you to look at something really closely. I'm just doing this just to show you something real quick, because I probably won't leave it like this. But I've dragged this copy over from down here. I've patched up the back end of this bike. The coolest thing though, we can actually feather selections in real time with Vanishing Point. Check this out. And I'll come up here to the feather option and slide this feather value slider here. And you can start to see the edges become very soft where that patch is. Look at that. Let me show you something else here. You may find that sometimes you might not want your opacity at 100% with your patches. So you can actually turn down the opacity just like this. Almost like turning down the opacity of a layer and then seeing what's below that layer. It's the same way, except it's actually just an area or a patch that you've just selected. So it's kind of cool. It's not really like a real layer or anything like that. So it really works really nicely in that way. And so maybe you don't want to cover up something 100%. You just want to do it very gradual. So you can come in here and turn down the opacity. But of course for this, we're going to leave it at 100%. Okay. Those are some other little cool tricks and things and options you can play with in Vanishing Point. All right, so now you really get the general idea on how Vanishing Point works. It's a lot of fun. And the cool thing is that we don't have to really leave Vanishing Point to finish things. We can all really do everything right in here. We have all the tools, we have all the options. We even have a brush tool in Vanishing Point. We have the smudge tool. We even have an eyedropper tool. We have a ruler. So we have so many tools available to us that we don't have to leave Vanishing Point and go back into it. We can just do everything right here. Go ahead and click OK. It's a done deal. And you can see, since we've created a new layer, before we went into Vanishing Point, all those areas that we've patched and edited is on its own separate layer. Look at that. But let me show you something else here. Let me move this out of the way, and let's get our completed image right here. And of course, this took me a little bit more time. I didn't want to do the whole entire image. I didn't want to erase the whole bike because it's going to take maybe a couple hours or an hour and a half or so, and I don't want you to feel like you had to watch me go through the whole thing. So I'm just going to jump ahead here and show you some other tricks after you are finished in Vanishing Point. But what we can do, if I make this touch-up layer invisible, and I think I spelt that wrong. I think I need a C in there. There we go. If I make this invisible, we can see the bike right underneath it. But sometimes we might patch a little bit more than we wanted to. The cool thing about having all the edits that we made in Vanishing Point on its own layer is that we can create a layer mask, and then I can select the paintbrush on the toolbar with the foreground as black. I can come in here and paint back areas that were patched up in Vanishing Point. So I can lower the opacity of this layer, and we can start to see the original layer below it. But you can see like something like this crack here that was patched up. But what I can do is turn that down, turn this opacity of this layer down, just so I can see what I'm doing here. I'll click on the layer mask with the brush, and I can come through here and paint back areas of the original image. So I can just go around the bike here and bring everything back. Not everything, but just to the bicycle there. And then I can turn the opacity back up, and now we have a crack there in the image. You can see this is before, and now that we've used the mask, this is after. So we've brought back some of the detail, and I can just patch up some of these little areas here. There we go. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. And Vanishing Point just rocks. So there you have it. I hope you got a lot out of this. Use Vanishing Point. It works. It's a great tool. And we'll see you guys on the next video.